What's more dangerous, a loaded gun or a pack of sausages? The answer seems obvious. But in 2016, in a quiet Florida town, sausages became the weapon a son used to attack his own mother. And this isn't a comedy, it's a tragedy. Over the next 10 minutes, we'll break down this absurd story, frame by frame. We'll show how the most ridiculous conflict can reveal a universal mechanism of psychological breakdown, a mechanism that's ticking inside many families. In the police report, the incident was classified as aggravated battery, meaning assault with aggravating circumstances. The sausages were, in effect, treated as a deadly weapon. This is not a joke. Under Florida law, almost any object used to cause harm can be classified as a weapon. This turns a kitchen absurdity into a legal precedent. The story presents us with 3 questions. First, why sausages? What do they symbolize in this family drama? Second, was it drugs, or was there something more sinister behind this act? And the main question, what could the mother have done to provoke such a reaction? Let's start with the second question. Drugs. The first thought of the officers on the scene was flakka or methamphetamine, a typical catalyst for madness in Florida. But the toxicology report came back completely clean. This was even more frightening. The evil wasn't chemical, it was psychological. Time, 7:15 a.m. Location, a kitchen in the suburbs of Zephyr Hills, Florida. Subject, Peter Wagner, 33 years old. In his report, Officer Stevens wrote, "Upon arrival, I found the victim in a state of distress and numerous sausage products scattered across the kitchen. The suspect offered no resistance and appeared calm, which contrasted with the chaos of the scene." This calm after the storm is a key detail. But the police noted another strange detail in the report. During the assault, Wagner wasn't just throwing sausages, he was screaming the same phrase, over and over. That phrase is the key to the entire story. Like a verbal black box from his psychological crash, it recorded what was happening in his mind in the final seconds before impact. "And now, we're going to decode it," he screamed. "You are not my mother." Again and again, just 4 words, but they hold the entire access code to this drama. It all started with a simple request to clean the kitchen. Peter refused. Then his mother issued an ultimatum. "Either you clean up or I'm kicking you out of the house." And that's where everything broke. The trigger wasn't the request. The trigger was the threat of losing his last bastion. For 33-year-old Wagner, his mother's house wasn't just a roof over his head. It was his psychological home, the last fortress of security in a world where he had clearly failed to make it. The threat of eviction was equivalent to the threat of his entire identity being annihilated. It's like telling an astronaut on a spacewalk, "I'm about to cut your oxygen line." From her perspective, it was a normal domestic dispute. She saw an adult son who didn't want to help with chores. Her simple and understandable desire for order clashed with his distorted perception of reality. They were both speaking English, but on completely different frequencies. She was broadcasting on Domestic Life FM, discussing cleanliness and responsibilities. He was listening to Existential Dread Radio, where any threat was perceived as the end of the world. It's no wonder they didn't understand each other. The phrase, "you are not my mother," isn't a literal denial of kinship. It's a metaphor. In his mind, a mother is someone who provides unconditional love and shelter. The moment she threatened to kick him out, she ceased to fulfill that function. She transformed into an enemy, a stranger. In psychology, this is called splitting. Unable to accept that the good mother who feeds and shelters him and the bad mother who threatens him are the same person, his psyche split her image in 2, and he attacked the bad one to protect the idealized image of the good one. Think about a time when a loved one, in the heat of an argument, told you, "I don't even know who you are." In that second, they don't see you. They see a threat to their world. The sausage conflict is the same mechanism, just taken to an absurd extreme. Psychologists call this a functional relationship, where we value a person not for who they are, but for the role they play for us, the husband provider, the wife homemaker, the mother support system. As soon as the person steps outside that function, the system glitches. Wagner saw his mother as the security function. When that function was threatened, a system failure occurred. But this explosion wasn't spontaneous. It was the culmination of a long, invisible war where the kitchen was the battlefield, and the weapons were control, criticism, and food. Psychologists call such families low-intensity conflict zones. There are no open battles, but there's constant tension, guerrilla raids of sarcasm, and acts of sabotage like unfulfilled requests. The sausage attack wasn't the start of the war. It was its loudest and most absurd battle. In this war, the mother had total logistical control. Peter, a 33-year-old man, lived on her territory and on her dime. She decided what he would eat, when he should wake up, and how he spent his pocket money. This is a classic example of a codependent relationship where caring becomes the perfect camouflage for control. According to the Pew Research Center, about 15% of American men aged 25 to 35 live with their parents. But Wagner's case is an extreme form of what psychologists call Peter Pan syndrome. Only in this version, Wendy isn't his friend. She's his domineering mother. This also explains the choice of weapon. Why not a knife? Because his goal wasn't to kill, but to humiliate. A sausage is a symbol of home-cooked food, of maternal care in its most primitive form. By attacking his mother with her own weapon, he was symbolically rejecting her model of control. It was a rebellion not against her as a person, but against her power, expressed through domesticity. Anthropologists know that food has always been a tool of dominance. In ancient tribes, the chief distributed food, thereby asserting his status. Wagner's attack was an inversion of this ancient ritual. He took the symbol of her power, the food she bought and prepared, and used it to challenge that power. This conflict didn't come out of nowhere. It went through all the stages of escalation. Imagine a scale. On the left is healthy communication. On the right is a sausage attack. First, the slider moves to passive aggression, silence, ignoring, then to sarcasm, then to minor acts of sabotage like unwashed dishes, and only then, screaming. Let's call this the conflict escalation ladder based on the work of psychologist John Gottman. The first steps are criticism and contempt. Then comes stonewalling, and if the steam isn't released at these stages, it erupts at the very top in the form of an irrational, sausage-fueled explosion. You're familiar with these first steps. Control through food. I cooked and you're not eating. Control through cleanliness. I've been cleaning all day and you. Control through schedules. Why are you so late? Each of these phrases is a classic double bind, a term introduced by anthropologist Gregory Bateson. On one level, it's about care. On another, it's a demand for submission. No matter how you answer, you lose. If you eat, you've submitted. If you don't, you're ungrateful. It's a trap with no good way out. This constant pressure doesn't just ruin your mood. It physically changes your brain chemistry, weakening the safety fuses and priming it for an irrational outburst. Chronic stress acts on the brain like acid on metal. It slowly corrodes the neural connections in the prefrontal cortex, our center for self-control. In the next chapter, with the help of neuroscience, we'll look at this corrosion under a microscope. Imagine your brain is an airplane. The prefrontal cortex, the center of logic and self-control, is your experienced pilot in the cockpit. Deep inside, in the limbic system, sits the amygdala, the panicky passenger in the cabin. Years of chronic stress, humiliation, and control slowly weaken the lock on the cockpit door. And in a moment of threat, even one as perceived as his mother's ultimatum, the panicky passenger bursts in and grabs the controls. This amygdala hijack, a term coined by psychologist Daniel Goleman, happens in a fraction of a second. The signal from Wagner's ears traveled to his amygdala on a neural superhighway, triggering a reaction before the information even reached the pilot, the prefrontal cortex. In essence, Wagner threw the sausages first, and only then did his brain begin to process what had happened. It's the neurobiological equivalent of shoot first, ask questions later. Every sarcastic comment from his mother, every reproach, was a drop of the stress hormone cortisol into his mental container. Day after day, year after year, when that container overflows, any small thing is enough to cause an explosion. A request to clear the table becomes the last straw that triggers a biochemical flood. Research from Yale University confirms this, showing that chronic stress causes physical shrinkage, atrophy of the prefrontal cortex. The longer Wagner lived in this environment, the weaker and more helpless his inner pilot became. This isn't a metaphor. It's physiology. If Wagner had been inside an fMRI machine at that moment, we would have seen a startling picture. His rational brain, the frontal lobes, would be dark, but his limbic system, the center of emotion and fear, would be glowing red. These aren't just pretty pictures. During an amygdala hijack, blood flow is literally redirected from the prefrontal cortex to the survival structures. Your smart brain is, at that moment, deprived of blood. It is physically incapable of analyzing, planning, and making sound decisions. It can only react, fight, flight, or freeze. Wagner chose the first. Think about your last irrational outburst over something trivial. Now, analyze not the cause, but the background. Were you hungry, sleep-deprived, stressed from work? Often, our personal sausage attack isn't aimed at the person in front of us. It's merely an outlet for accumulated biochemical tension. Psychologist Roy Baumeister proved that willpower is a finite resource directly linked to blood glucose levels. When you're hungry or tired, your prefrontal cortex literally lacks the fuel to restrain the panicky passenger's impulses. Perhaps that morning, Peter Wagner didn't need to throw the sausages. He needed to eat one. This explosion was building in plain sight. People just didn't know what to look for. There is an early warning protocol, 3 signals that indicate a system is on the verge of collapse. Signal 1, the microscope effect. This is when an argument about a dirty cup or a light left on becomes a matter of life and death. A trivial issue is blown up to universal proportions. Signal 2, the Sith Lord mode. This is black and white thinking, where a person stops seeing shades of gray. You're either with me or against me. Any disagreement is seen as betrayal. And signal 3, domestic terrorism. These are small acts of symbolic sabotage aimed at things sacred to the other person, their order, their rules, their food. If you see these 3 signals, expect an explosion. But it can be stopped. When you see someone getting worked up and reaching a boiling point, don't argue with their logic. There is none. Instead, break the pattern. Ask a completely unexpected disarming question, something like, do you think sausages could be considered a projectile weapon? For a second, this engages the prefrontal cortex and can halt the amygdala hijack. FBI negotiators call this reframing. Instead of arguing within the problematic frame of who's right and who's wrong, they create a new, unexpected one. The sausage question is a perfect reframe that shifts the brain from combat mode to puzzle-solving mode. The story of Peter Wagner isn't an anecdote about some Florida weirdo. It's a tragic parable about how unspoken resentments and hidden control turn love into tyranny and a kitchen into a battlefield. And the most terrifying weapon in this war isn't a sausage, but silence. By the way, how did this story end? The charges against Peter Wagner were dropped on one condition. He had to move out of his mother's house and complete an anger management course. Sometimes, the most absurd act becomes the catalyst for the most necessary change. It was his twisted but only way of leaving home. So what's more frightening in this story? The absurd attack itself, or the years of quiet psychological abuse that led to it? It's a choice between an explosion and corrosion. An explosion is loud and visible. Corrosion is quiet and unseen, but it destroys the very foundation. What's more dangerous for the structure of your relationships? Let us know in the comments, the explosion or the corrosion.